I call the Honourable Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, this political year has got off to a decisive start with Prime Minister John Key setting out a very ambitious and focused plan on how we can shift this economy and secure the sort of future we want for New Zealanders by getting out of the debt consumption cycle and moving to an economy that is based on productive investment and exports. And in contrast, what we've heard from Phil Goff and most recently from Labour's most recent Speaker is all that stuff about big spending, about borrow and hope policies that have actually got New Zealand into the pretty fragile position that we're in today. It's noteworthy that in the month of January, Labour spokespeople promised over $5 billion of new spending, and the cash register was ticking over in bulk as Grant Robertson just gave that speech. Give an example. Grant has said today, Mr Robertson has said, free after-hours care for all New Zealanders. Well, I have a simple question for Grant. Where is the money coming from? Where is the money coming from? Can Mr Robertson and Mr Goff just tell us where their money tree is? Where is their money tree? Because there is absolutely no fiscal credibility in where the money is going to fund the extravagant and unsustainable spending commitments that we're seeing from Labour. In health, I would remind Mr Robertson, sure, Labour doubled the amount of money they spent in health, and yet there was negligible additional services. They can go on about the care of children, but the reality is Labour had an appalling record on something as basic and important as immunisation, and I want to congratulate my colleague and benchmate Tony Ryle for achieving the highest ever level of immunisation of children in this country, particularly those high levels for Pacific Island Maori children, because they are the things that count, that show that this John Key government is serious about getting good quality public services, but not a bloated public service. You know, the biggest growth in health during Labour's years was in the number of bureaucrats in the health ministry, and I make no apologies for being part of the national government that wants to focus our public services on the front line, on our police, on our nurses, on our doctors and on our teachers, that actually will make a material difference, rather than the bureaucrats that Mr Robertson always wants to see get a bigger slice of the funding. But I want to focus also on some of the issues relevant to my portfolios that expose the contradictions in Labour's approach. Let me take employment. In 2009 we had the Job Summit, and a big concern for a large number of employers and councils around this country was the ridiculous air quality rules that the previous Labour government put in place that would see 17,000 New Zealanders lose their jobs. Let me tell you why, Mr Speaker. Because despite the fact that our biggest problem with air quality is actually households and cars, the only people to be punished under Labour's air quality policy was going to be industry. You see, it's very simple for Labour. They're anti-business. Doesn't matter the problem. If there is going to be punishment, it has to be business that pays. What they don't understand is that those businesses employ the very New Zealanders that it is more important than ever that we keep in jobs. And I was pleased to announce at the Blue-Green Conference in Akaroa the new air quality standards that will save 17,000 jobs. Environment who says that Labour's policy unfairly targeted business. Now I say to members opposite, don't stand on your feet and talk about jobs when the very regulations that you pass and you continue to support this day would see thousands of New Zealanders in cities all over this country lose their jobs. And then the other contradiction. I hear members opposite crying crocodile tears about the cost of living. Well, let me just take one example. On the 24th of December, Labor made an announcement on climate change policy. They said that they wanted to move the ETS to full obligation immediately, quote unquote, immediately. Well, let's be honest about what that means for the cost of living. What it means is that it will put 3.5 cents on the price of both petrol and diesel immediately. What it means is an extra 5% on the price of power. And so do I say to members opposite, don't cry crocodile tears about the cost of living when you are at the same time announcing policies that will push up costs for ordinary New Zealand families. And I make no apologies for members on this side of the House having a sensible, balanced ETS that has reduced the costs that Labor's scheme would have imposed on families and on businesses. But let me take another area. I was interested today to get advice about what sort of things would happen to the cost of living for families under ACC policies opposite. Let me put it simply this. For the first time in years, this national government said we're not going to put the ACC levies up on motor vehicles, on earners and on businesses. And we've been able to do that because we as a government have been able to get on top of the costs that were occurring in ACC. Those costs were going up by 12% every single year from 2003 to 2008. And if there's a 12% increase each year in claim costs, who pays that? Ordinary New Zealanders. When they go to register their vehicle, every week when they get their pay, those ACC levies are taken out. And you know, if we had let those costs continue to grow, those levies would have to have gone up by $200 per New Zealand family. In other words, every single New Zealand family would have to be paying another $30 when they register their car if we'd allowed Labor's policies to continue. Every New Zealander on the average wage would have been up for another $150 a year, another $3 a week in terms of the earners levy if we'd allowed those costs to continue to rise at 12% per year. You see, members opposite talk as though they're concerned about costs on New Zealanders, but during their period in government, over and over again had policies that simply drove up costs that end up falling on households and businesses, and the changes that this government has made are consistent. I want to make one further and important point. The Prime Minister started this year with a very bold call around the mixed ownership policy in respect of state-owned enterprises, a policy that will expand the investment opportunities for New Zealanders. They've been burned off the finance companies. They don't want them investing more and more in residential property, and we're going to provide opportunities for them to invest in good New Zealand companies. But, Mr Chairman, I want to expose the double standards, Mr Speaker, that goes it. Can I quote David Cunliffe, the finance spokesperson, on the 25th of November 2010? He said this at a very important speech at Victoria University: "We can unleash state-owned enterprises to create and grow new businesses with private partners and private shareholders." They are the speech of Mr David Cunliffe, the finance spokesperson for Labor members opposite. And I just have a simple challenge for the Phil Goffs and the other members of Labor's team that have ranted and raved against this policy. Or why didn't they rant and rave in November? I tell you why. Because they are absolutely hollow in their vision for New Zealand. They want to play politics with the issues that are so important to this country: getting efficient public services, reorientating our economy towards exports, getting quality education services, making sure that our environment policies are supporting the growth and the jobs that New Zealand needs, making sure that in areas like agriculture where my colleagues announce big announcements about the Primary Growth Partnership. This government has got a positive plan for New Zealand, whether it's jobs, whether it's cost of livings, whether it's mixed ownership for state-owned enterprises, the mixed signals, the confused policy, the straight, pure politics that we see from the Labour opposition shows they're into opportunism, but they have absolutely no idea as to what is required to make New Zealand strong.
Sue Moroney.